Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner University. With me, as always, Paul O'Neid and a plethora of guests today. Welcome. Thank you for coming on, guys, and thanks for being here, Paul.
It's my pleasure.
I thought you were going to say that in French.
C'est mon plaisir, mon ami.
Oh, that's pretty good. You could just answer the rest of the questions that way.
I don't know a lot of the jargon in French, though. I speak very book French. I wish I knew Quebecer French, like country French. That would be great.
Kevin, I think your house is on fire. You see all the smoke coming from his house?
I'm just smoking meat. I'm meal prepping right now.
Fair enough. All right. So we have some guests on today to do a live kind of Q&A podcast episode. So we took some questions just in case no one had anything to start off with. So we're going to start off with that. And then we're going to take questions from everyone that's on here. So as we're going over this, guys, you can ask follow-up questions to what we're going on. You can ask questions about anything. So feel free to just chime in whenever you can. And if you have a question pertaining to what we're talking about, you can just raise your hand or just chime in. It doesn't really matter. First question we got was optimal squat stance bar position in relation to building up your deadlift. So the idea is, do you want to elaborate on that, Paul?
Yeah, so the question was in relation to modifying your execution of the competition lifts to complement the opposite lift. So would we ever recommend a client change their squat stance to allow them, or squat positioning to allow them to train the deadlift better or more often or to a higher intensity, and vice versa? So would we ever change the deadlift to accommodate the squat?
Good. What do you think about that?
So it's an interesting kind of two-way conversation because I remember a few years ago, Greg Knuckles put out a review and he went over the difference is in the top Wilks lifters in different weight classes and how their stances mirrored one another in the squat and the deadlift. And he showed that the strongest lifters had very similar squat stances to their deadlift stances. So if you were a, closer stance, heeled shoed squatter, you most likely pulled conventional. If you're a wider stance squatter, you most likely pulled sumo. And we can see anecdotally that seems to be the case. I looked at a guy like someone like John Hack, very, narrow high bar squat, conventional deadlift. On the female side, you look at a girl like Hunter Henderson, a beautiful sumo deadlift and a very wide stance squat. And then Dan Green, wide stance squat, sumo deadlift. Yuri Belkin, wider stance squat, sumo deadlift. So you see a lot of, and that makes sense, right? Because you would have a better dynamic correspondence because you're getting double the training on that stance. So a very similar stance, you're getting a lot of crossover. The argument to the contrary would be, well, if your stances were more different, you could train the lift to a higher intensity because there would be less fatigue crossing over. I think where that argument gets kind of nullified is the fact that they're both axially loaded lifts and they're both very heavy. So the demand on recovery for both of them is going to be outweighed by the fact that you could train each of them less and get more out of it. So as far as where I would stand on the making modifications to a lifter, I have never had to do it. I think it's more so something that just naturally happens. Like for myself, I squat relatively narrow. I pull conventional. All of my wider stance squatters all pull sumo. And that's just because they've done it already. It's just a more natural positioning for them to be in because that's where their hips feel more comfortable. The only time I've ever had to change it is if a lifter was injured and we had to change their stance, but it wasn't because we wanted to maximize the other lifts.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a different interpretation of the question than I would have had. I think that was the obvious, right? Like you're going to squat and deadlift where you feel the strongest. So right. That's usually going to be something that's correlational to looking almost identical, so to speak. Right. I thought the question was pertaining to if I pull conventional on a deadlift, and I squat this way, should I change up my stance and see if that would build up my conventional in a different way?
Well, that's a totally valid question as well too.
Yeah. Which the answer is like, it just depends on where you're failing your deadlift, and if that lift can actually bring up those weak areas better than trying to isolate those weak areas that you're trying to build up, right? I'm never one for thinking that a compound lift is going to build up weak muscles, so to speak, unless it's trying to isolate those muscles in a certain way, right? Like if you're trying to build up your hamstrings because they're weak, right? Doing an RDL may elicit your ability to build those up, but it can also build up fatigue. So maybe a glute ham raise or a seated leg curl could be a better way to build up your hamstring strength, as long as that dynamically corresponds to your ability to deadlift. And how do you know that? Well, you just deadlift every week. And if your deadlift's getting better, then the hamstring work is working, right? So I don't necessarily think that adding in more compound movements, right? Like if you're doing competition squats and you think, well, okay, if I do like I'm always rounding in my deadlifts. So for my accessories, I'm going to do SSB competition deadlift stance squats, right? It's like, well, yeah, maybe, but if that's going to elicit so much fatigue that you're not able to do any of your other accessories to a high degree, is that as valuable, right? Everything has a trade-off to it. So you have to understand that if you're trying to build up volume with the idea that you're trying to build up weaker muscles and make them stronger, maybe undulating that volume towards exercises that don't create as much fatigue may be better in the initial stage. And then as you're getting closer to a competition, obviously the more compound movements you do and taking away those isolation movements, the more it's going to have a dynamic correspondence to your main lifts.
Yeah, I that interpretation of the question brings with it like the idea of special exercises. So like,
yeah,
I remember back in the day, we were doing like close stance, SSB, high box squats to build our conventional deadlift. You set the box at the deadlift height of your hip, and then you squat down to it. There's the only time I've ever, and this is completely anecdotal, the only time I've ever seen a carryover from like changing a stance was when I switched from conventional to sumo. My squat exploded. And I've seen that with a few of my lifters as well, including like sumo block pulls or some sort of sumo deadlift to build the hips has had a good carryover to the squat. But in terms of training the squat, the only thing I've ever seen carry over to the deadlift is safety bar. Personally, I feel the safety bar squat is better for my deadlift than it is for my squat. But
I wonder if the switch from sumo building up your squat was also less fatigue on the lower back, so you had more ability to perform your squat, right, in a less fatigued state.
But yeah, and that was actually part of the reason why I felt that, because I still squatted with a narrow stance. So I was like, well, maybe if my lower back is less fatigued from deadlifting, that allowed me to train my squat higher, which is the argument for like varying the squat. So like if you're a narrow squatter pulling sumo, you can train each one of them heavier with less carryover fatigue, but it just doesn't seem to work that way long term.
Yeah, because I mean, if you're a sumo puller, and that's like if you're a legit sumo puller, right? Not if you're a sumo puller who it still looks like a conventional stiff leg deadlift, but you're doing a sumo stance, right? If you can legitimately externally rotate your hips and get into a very good sumo position, then you're probably morphologically built to squat, and it's going to be more advantageous for you in that wider position as well.
Mm-hmm.
The only time it would make a difference, and that's also genetic outliers too, right? Like, when Greg Nuckols does that research and the Wilks is correlated to them mimicking each other, it's like, well, their ability to mimic each other is probably why their squat and deadlift are so good, more than them mimicking it is why their squat and deadlifts are so good, right?
A good point too, yeah.
Dan Green has the hips. I mean, he was a cheerleader and he was a gymnast, so his hips are, his
hips are this wide.
Right. And he's just allowed to like externally rotate and like drive out, and he can dive bomb a wide squat and never really have issues until he got older. Right. So it's like, it's hard to, correlational stuff is always hard to take away. The question is like, well, do you feel really strong in that stance? And do you feel like that's your best, most efficient stance for you? And if that's the case, then that's usually what you go with, and you find exercise to build that up. And much like you said, right? Like if you have someone who needs to work on their conventional deadlift, maybe putting them in a leg press machine and have their stance mimic their conventional is going to be a lot better to build up their legs if their legs are a weak point, because it's going to be less fatigue on their entire body. So then they can train their squat in a less fatigued state, right? And then they can drive them up together, because that's a big thing as well. When you're trying to push your deadlift and your squat at the same time, a lot of people's deadlift starts to drop down if their squat goes up, right?
Yep.
If someone's squat goes up 50 pounds, they think that, oh, well, my deadlift should climb too. And a lot of times that doesn't happen. A lot of times their deadlift starts to suffer, because if you're able to add exponentially more weight to your squat, that's going to put exponentially more load into the axial loading of that, which is going to make the deadlift, if that's your movement, which is typically everybody's movement at the end of the week, that much harder, right?
Right. Absolutely. Totally agree.
So anybody want to chime in with anything else? Any thoughts on that, since we have other coaches on? Or if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. We can't have dead air. This is a podcast, guys. Come on, help us out.
I was just gonna say I switched one of my lifters to a wider squat, and he does sumo, but he was very narrow on his squats, and while he was hitting depth, he was very forward, and his chest kept dropping. So one of the first things I did was just have him stand a bit wider and bring the bar lower on his back, and both lifts are coming up nicely.
Yeah,
and I think
perfect.
Yeah, and I think it works for him. But then I know another lifter who's very wide on his squat, but conventional and deads. And I think girth is a factor there, honestly.
He's got a big gut.
Yeah, I think girth. That's what, when you guys were talking, that's the first thing that stood out to me is the belly. I think that's going to be the variable between the two sometimes.
Tony, you had Sean. Sean pulls like 881, both conventional and sumo, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's just a great puller, though, right? Like,
okay,
that's just going to let you know that guy's built to pull, right? If you can do both of them that way, because he doesn't have necessarily a big gut. Sean's a big guy, but he's not like one of those big super heavyweights that has a gut that gets in their way of their deadlift. And I'm surprised, right, Kelly? Like you said, he has a bigger gut and he pulls conventional. Most guys that have bigger guts have a hard time pulling conventional as well. They have to roll the bar to them, and typically guys with bigger guts have a little bit more advantageous ability to squat with a narrow stance, because everything just kind of rebounds into each other, right? Like Chad Smith is one of those guys that had like a dive bomb squat, because everything just kind of like met at the bottom and was like boing right back out.
I knew you were going to make a sound, and I was waiting for what the sound was going to be, whether it was going to be like
I like Chad.
Like the guy I'm thinking of, he's not much taller than me, but he's like 300 pounds. He's not much taller than me. I'm 5'3". He might be 5'5".
So he's a circle.
5'6". Yeah. And
he
leg
can
length,
conventional pull.
Yeah. Pretty good too. Pretty good.
That's impressive.
Yeah, he is pretty good. But yeah, so it's just different. And I do think, but he has to go wide on his squats. He has to.
There's so much individuality when it comes to these type of questions, right? Everything's going to be based on the lifter, right? We're going to have to speak in generalities when it comes to a podcast to disseminate some of the information, but always understand inter-individuality is going to be the most important thing when it comes to a lifter, and understanding exercise selection and what's going to be best for them. But I think it's important when you do have a newer lifter to try different things as well, right? Don't let them get so fixated on one stance or one way of doing things, right? Be able to try different things out so that they have an understanding of what actually feels good for them. Because a lot of lifters that get into the sport, they're going to mimic who brought them into the sport as much as they can, right? So getting them to go away from that and trying other different things, right? Unless you're doing some type of morphological assessment where you're checking out, like, doing a Thomas test to see hip extension, hip flexion, and checking internal, external rotate. Like you can almost predispose someone to what their lifts are going to be based on their morphological things. But do you have the time to do that? Are you someone who actually has the scope of practice to do it? Most of us don't. We're not PTs, we're not clinicians. So, just trying out a variety of things is always going to be the best way of doing it.
Yeah, I like what you said about
Yeah.
whatever stance feels strongest, because it's whatever way you can squat the most uninhibited, right? Like you don't want to be fighting yourself down into the hole or forcing these positions. It's whatever allows you to get down and up as quickly and as efficiently and comfortably as possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a quick. Yeah, I have a quick question. So if someone is like programmed to do a sumo deadlift and they can't really get to depth, like they can't get their butt to the ground before they pull, would you say that's like an individual variable in terms of how low someone can actually go before they pull a sumo?
So go ahead, Paul.
So from a powerlifting standpoint, you're not really concerned with how low the hips are. You're concerned at how close to the barbell the hips can get. So if we're looking on a side view, you want the vertical plane of the hip as close to the path of the barbell as possible. So that like if you drew a triangle from the torso to the hip to the knee straight down, you'd want to make that triangle as small as possible. If you're talking from like a bodybuilding execution of like a sumo squat deadlift kind of thing, you would go
Just
until
deadlift.
I would assume that you would go until the point where you can maintain tension. And if you couldn't get that tension with the bar on the ground, I would just move the bar up like on plates. Just alter the range of motion to make sure that you can maximize the tension through the tissue that you're trying to recruit.
Yeah, I think when it comes to sumo deadlift or any type of deadlift, you're looking at where your hips are when that bar leaves the ground. So if you have someone whose hips are down low and they go to pull and the bar doesn't move until their hips start to rise, that's telling you that where those hips rise to is probably where they're the strongest. It's the most advantageous position for them. So that would be more or less where their start position should and could be, right? You want to minimize as much hip movement as possible when you're starting that position, because you're just wasting a lot of energy, right? If you're down too low and you go to pull and your hips rise, that's going to start pushing you forward. And if you're going forward, that means a lot of the weight's going to start going forward. So then the bar is going to get out in front of you. From a powerlifting perspective, from a bodybuilding perspective, the question is like, well, is sumo deadlift the good lift for the person anyways, if they can't get into that position, right? A sumo deadlift is a lift that allows for a lot of technical proficiency and a lot of morphological considerations. So it may not be the best lift for everyone anyways. It depends on what muscles you're trying to work and what you're trying to get out of it, right? If you're trying to improve your adductors and improve your quads and things like that, there's probably better exercises for it. And then if you're using it for glutes, I just don't really understand why you would do that, because if you think about it, your glutes really don't do much. There's not a lot of lengthening to them, and they're already kind of shortened from the start because you're not creating a lot of length to them. So it doesn't really seem like that's the most advantageous barbell movement to try to build up lower body musculature. But if you are, then it is like where those hips are at, where the bar leaves the ground, is that person's strongest position. And that's kind of where I would start that person at from there, and just working on, instead of bringing your hips down, you're trying to bring your hips closer to the bar. You never want to squat the bar up when you're sumo deadlift, and it's a hip hinge with external rotation.
Okay. Yeah.
Anybody else want to chime in on sumo
Makes
deadlifts?
sense.
Nope. You got a follow up, Brooke?
No, I was just saying thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
But
Any
yeah.
other questions? Going once.
Just to build up upon like when you guys were saying like trial and error, basically, find the position that sits you well and feels good, doesn't hurt anymore, things like that. What's the best way you guys find with working with somebody to try and find that, like you said, the big gut in the way for deadlifting, or ankle mobility changes when squatting, from doing narrow high bar? Like how do you really find that you all of a sudden see, hey, something's up with your technique, something's happened? Obviously you're seeing somebody, you're saying your clients all of a sudden change some things in their life or something like that, whether it be like weight loss or like in my position is just screwed myself up somehow, and things just aren't working anymore like they used to. So what's the best way other than trial and error really to find that goal?
So one of the things that I look at is almost kind of like where, for me, whenever I'm doing this, is where they're starting to miss that lift. What's causing them to miss that lift is going to let you know what their limiting factors are. So for me, when I was squatting, I was able to get up to an 800-pound squat, but every time I missed, it was because my left knee started buckling in, and I could never actually externally rotate that left hip to keep that knee out. And then I saw that it slowly started to transfer into my sumo deadlift, and then it started creating hip problems. So I had to bring that in. If I was a more aware lifter, I would have seen that from the very beginning, that every time a lift got heavy or every time I missed a lift, my left knee would start to cave in, right? Nothing else would. So that's telling me that, okay, well, maybe there's some morphological issues going on there. And it always felt tight in the sumo deadlift, but I just figured maybe that's just because I was immobile. So those type of things are going to be telltale signs. And that's why kind of moving people through maybe some type of variety as accessory work to test their capabilities of where their end ranges are will allow you to see that, right? So say if you have someone who wants to do sumo deadlift, but they're pulling conventional and they think sumo might be a better choice for them, maybe having them do some type of elevated, I guess they would be deficit sumo kettlebells, right? And you can see where their hip mobility is at within those movements, right? So then maybe you can determine whether or not that's actually a good position for them, right? Are they able to externally rotate? Are they able to stay in an upright position and get as low as possible, even though the lights load? It can kind of tell you their end ranges of motion. Or if you're really looking into that, you can maybe take some FRC, functional range conditioning courses, and they teach a lot about end ranges of movement and getting your athletes in there. And just also understanding too, right? Like if someone's losing weight, where they once were as far as center of gravity and girth, as Kelly eloquently put it earlier, is going to start to shrink. And as that shrinks, everything else needs to shrink with them. Their stance needs to come in to follow their waistline. Their hand grip needs to come in to follow their waistline. So you're thinking about, right, if the wider the center of mass or the bigger the center of mass, everything else is going to be exponentially bigger as well. And as soon as that starts to come in, everything needs to kind of follow suit to make sure that you're able to keep those or try to mimic those same leverages that you once had. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I would, I like, those are two really good options you have. So you look at the main lift and you say, okay, where are you breaking down? So in Tony's case, it was his left knee was always caving. So it's an indication that, you know, the body will usually resort to the positions in which it feels strongest. So a lot of the time, you know, you get in this position where like, oh, I want to squat in this stance and my knees keep caving. Well, I need to do more external rotation work. Maybe it's just your hips feel stronger in that position where the knee is, right? So bring your feet in about an inch and you no longer have knee cave. That's been a fix for a number of athletes I've worked with. Then you can look at, okay, well, maybe the upper back is giving away. Maybe we can modify the hand position to accommodate a better rack on the back. Same with the bench press. Like, are we seeing any like elbow wobble on the eccentric? Are we seeing a loss of tension at the chest? Is there a way that we can manipulate the technique independent of any other factor, manipulate the technique to improve positioning? And you'll only know that based on the specific breakdowns that you see. I'm a really big fan of exploring those end ranges in the assistance work, as Tony mentioned. So like someone who you want to know if they have good pelvic control and deep hip flexion, have them do a snatch grip stiff leg deadlift. Nice bent over position. See if you can get neutral in your pelvis. If you want to know, like if you can get into that, you know, deep shoulder extension position, have them do some deficit push-ups, right? So you can check out these end ranges within loaded patterns, and that'll give you an indication of where you might have a deficit in the main lift, and then you can adjust your positioning to accommodate for that. You know, I'm running into having to find a new hand position on my squat because I'm much bigger than I was the last time I tried to max out my squat. And, with the changes in body weight that I've gone through, my squat stance has had to change as well. So just like looking at where the breakdowns are taking place, looking at where you're having to fight for position. And it could be something as simple as, having trouble. You mentioned ankle mobility. So if you're like, I'm having really hard time allowing my knees to track forward, turn your toes out like 10 degrees. Boom, you just improved your ankle mobility. Or, I'm having trouble with my knees caving. Well, bring your feet in a 1/2 inch on each side. See if that helps. These don't have to be like massive wholesale changes. And that's something that I do with my athletes I wouldn't say frequently, but whenever I see these breakdowns start to occur, it's just, hey, why don't we next week try bringing your stance in just a 1/2 inch on each side? Or in your sumo deadlift, let's try get your toes a little closer to the plates, but keep your heels in the same position. Just stuff like that to try and in the sumo deadlift, that would bring the hips forward, allow more space for the knees, that sort of thing. So understanding how these manipulations in the extremities reflect in changes of positioning or tension in the proximal torso area, right? Because that's where you're going to be storing all your tension. Does that make sense? Okay, perfect.
Did we answer your question, Blaine?
Yeah, you betcha.
Okay. One thing to think about too, when you are trying to explore those end ranges, like Paul put it, is understanding the exercises that he said as well, right? Like you're exploring pelvic stability and hips and stuff like that in a conventional stance with a snatch grip deadlift, right? But because that stance provides stability in and of itself, you're able to load that end range. But then as soon as he went to the shoulder, which has limited stability because it has so much more range of motion, he went to an unloaded deficit push-up, right? So understanding those dynamics when you are trying to challenge those end ranges, the more you create instability within that movement, the less load you're going to be able to have. You're so distracting, Paul. What are you doing?
Hey, man.
Jesus, I didn't know this was a strip show.
I didn't want to show off my abs, bro.
God. So as you're doing that, right, you want to make sure that if you're trying to obtain stability within that hip, right, external rotation, internal rotation, when you start to externally load that, that's going to create an unstable position. So the load's not going to be as significant as a snatch grip, stiff leg deadlift, right? And anytime you're doing a shoulder, trying to get end ranges, there's limited stability there. So you want to be very careful with what you're trying to load and what you're trying to do to get those end range motions. They don't need much. So just think of that as well when you are thinking about maybe testing your athletes and finding their end ranges.
I'll actually make another point there as well. So the other thing you could try doing is just making modifications of the execution of the movement. So keeping the positioning the same, but asking them to slow down the tempo. No. That's just one example, right? So we're slowing down the tempo, allowing them to feel these positions under load. And you'll actually notice that if you slow down the tempo and have them find their positions of highest tension, their technique and execution will change on its own. Then you can look at, okay, did that allow them to find better positions? Maybe we just have to have them pause in certain positions to get better proprioceptive awareness. Right. So it doesn't always have to be a modification to the execution of the movement. It could just be a modification to the loading parameter or to the tempo or to the range of motion you're trying to lift within.
Yeah, and a great thing with the tempo too is you're able to really see where that lift starts to break down as well, if that lift is breaking down, right? Like a big issue with a lot of people is like, their pelvic tilt starts to, anteriorly and posteriorly go. So they have that butt wink in the bottom of a squat, right? So if you're having them do that tempo, you can start to see when that butt wink occurs and what could maybe be the probable cause for that to occur. And you can just have them start doing their squats to where it doesn't occur. And then you can find accessories to build up what is causing that to happen in the first place. So it's a great way to do things, tempo work and pauses. The one thing I would caveat, I would say with pauses is because I see this a lot of times too, is people do like pause deadlifts and they're like, this is going to bring up my deadlift because I round my back and pauses will help. And it's like, as soon as they pull, their back is rounded. So they're just pausing in a shitty position. So they're just reinforcing shitty positions. So don't ever have your athletes pause in like fucking bent over shitty positions, because that's not going to solve anything either. Right.
My favorite is the pause, like the pause deadlift, where they pull it to the knee, and then immediately when they get it to the knee, they just sit back onto their heels. So there's like no tension in the upper body at all. They're just sitting into their heels, and then it ends up being this like.
Yeah, they nailed it. That's just making the lift harder. You don't know what you're talking about, man.
Bro, work hard, not smart.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Any other questions, guys?
Not a question, but a comment. In terms of like online training and everything, I don't know if you guys are like online coaches or in-person trainers, but one way to kind of assess your athlete is with their check-ins. You could ask them to submit training videos if they want you to like assess their movement patterns and forms. That's been one thing I've been doing lately, and it's been helping a lot in terms of assessing someone's movement and actually improving the quality of someone's lifts over time.
Yeah, definitely a good point.
So that's helpful.
So we had some more questions while you guys are thinking of some questions. If you guys have any questions, you can just chat them down in the chat box. And Kevin, you asked the question. If you want to ask it live, that would be better, because it was a little bit of a convoluted question. So we may need a little bit more description for it. So if you want to ask that question, feel free to. But one of the things we had a question about was meal timing around training, which is something that can get butchered pretty easily with the idea of, how much food do you actually need before you train? How much food do you need after you train? And things like that. So there's a lot of nuances to this answer, but Paul, go ahead and tackle that one first.
Yeah, sure. So typically I'll recommend anything from like 60 to 90 minutes pre-workout to have a meal. That depends. For most people, that's fine. If you find that you're a little bit bogged down, or like, I personally like to have a little bit more of an empty stomach when I train. So my meal is usually about 2 hours before, but I also have intra-workout nutrition. Side note, shameless plug, try Pursue today. It's so light. It's awesome. Love it. Anyway,
Good.
Back to the question. So I personally like to eat about 2 hours before. In terms of protein, I eat 5 meals a day, and I split my protein evenly between all 5 meals. My carbohydrates for the day, I like to have between 40 and 50% of my carbohydrates within that pre, intra, and post-workout window. And then pre-workout, post-workout, I don't eat any carbohydrates. Yes, use code Paul10 when you order from Subject Zero. Yeah, so for me, that's my recommendation that I use, and I use for my athletes. For athletes who are eating more calories during the day, who are like on that higher end of the intake, I will allow them to have a little bit of fat pre-workout, which will help slow the digestion of that pre-workout meal and get a bit more steady blood glucose levels. But then I do shovel carbohydrates into them during training as well. So typically for pre-workout, that 2 hour window, if you are having intra-workout nutrition, you can leave that post-workout meal 60 to 90 minutes post-workout if you want, because you've already taken in those carbohydrates. If you're not having any intra-workout nutrition, I typically like to have my athletes eat between 30 and 60 minutes post-workout at the most.
Yeah, that's very, very like by the book, which is great. When it comes to the idea that you like to train on an empty stomach, why do you think that is?
I personally find so I have a bit of an indigestion issue, like in general, like my digestion is not great. So I find if I eat too close to training, there's too much blood in my intestines. My performance suffers quite significantly. The other thing is I do like to have carbs during training. So if my stomach is upset, it makes it really challenging to hydrate well during training.
Yeah. So the idea is like trying to think about, what kind of foods are going to digest the best with the person, and then also what digest faster for that person, right? But when you're also thinking about volume too, right? Within the landmarks of what do you actually need to perform at a high level, right? And if volume's not that high, if volume's a little bit low, and they're going into a session where they need to be very technically sound, having them be a little bit hungry, having them be a little bit fasted, so to speak, or having them not have as many carbohydrates is going to allow them to have more of a dopamine spike within their training, which is going to allow them to be more focused on the technical skill acquisition side of things. And since volume is going to be drastically down, there's really no need to have a bunch of carbohydrates to fuel that workout anyways. So if you are someone who does like intra-workout and you're looking for maybe skill acquisition and trying to go with a heavier set that day, focus in on trying to be a little bit hungry and a little bit not so much serotonin with carbohydrates being released, then that's going to allow for better skill acquisition. Then once you're done with that skill acquisition movement, then you can start sipping on your intra-workout and things of that nature. But if your volume's low, that's really going to dictate your necessity for carbohydrates. But also understand that carbohydrates do play a role, and they do play a good mechanistic role within the human body as far as fatigue and energy levels throughout a workout as well. If it's a long duration, higher volume workout, understanding that if you're having carbohydrates, that's going to affect 5-HT, serotonin, and 5-HT has been shown to have a detriment on fatigue, which, right, we don't want that. So by having carbohydrates in there, that allows for better amino acid flow, blunts serotonin, which is 5-HT, which is going to allow you to have better drive and less fatigue throughout that training session. Now, when it comes to post-workout, if you're someone that doesn't have a lot of calories, there's really not a necessity to eat post-workout. But if you're someone that has to, like, you just have X amount of meals in because you have a shit ton of calories in, then there's no downside of eating post-workout within 30 to 60 minutes. But if you don't have 2-a-days, if you're not training in the morning, then you have to train sometime in the evening. The idea of having carbohydrates or a meal right after is not a necessity. It doesn't make things worse if you do, but it doesn't necessarily make things better if you get the calories in that you're supposed to get in at the end of the day anyways. But if you are doing a 2-a-days, say you're doing some type of concurrent training where you're doing aerobic work in the morning, or you're training first thing in the morning, you're doing aerobic work in the evening, then having carbohydrates, right after the workout, and then another meal 4 hours after that is going to allow you to perform at a high level for both of those exercise bouts. So that's when meal timing is really going to be important, is when you're doing 2-a-days or when you're doing concurrent training or something along those lines. If you're just doing one training bout and it's a lower volume session, not that important. If it's a very, very high volume, carbohydrates intra-workout is going to be a little bit better to drive mechanisms of fatigue down.
So I have a question to build off of that. So typically, I shouldn't say typically, most people are going to take some sort of caffeine pre-workout.
Mm-hmm.
So caffeine is going to have a cognitive enhancing effect. It's going to mitigate fatigue to a certain extent. I don't know the answer to this question. I'm just kind of thinking through it. But would you think that the effect of the caffeine would allow you to eat more carbohydrates and avoid that dopamine, to get more dopamine spike without the carbohydrates impacting that in terms of skill acquisition?
It could.
Yeah.
It doesn't elicit that much of a dopamine response. Caffeine doesn't. If you took something like a choline, like an acetylcholine producer, that would elicit a greater dopamine response. So that may be a better option for you. Something like,
Augment?
Well, I was gonna say I've been playing around with taking nicotine before training, so I'll do nicotine.
You're out there hacking darts before training?
No. That's why I don't want to say it. Gum or the lozenges I've been taking, so like 2 milligrams before aerobic work. I'll do that because that's been shown to improve acetylcholine, which is going to help minimize fatigue so that you're able to keep that dopamine up more. So you're going to get more out of the workout. And the 2 times I've done it, I've increased my speed of training from 13 miles an hour to 14.5 miles an hour over an hour. So I was able to add in an extra 3 miles in my workout. So it does, just anecdotally, it definitely seems to help. But when it comes to fatigue and caffeine and stuff like that, that acts on the adenosine receptor, which helps with fatigue in higher endurance bouts, but it hasn't been shown, caffeine hasn't been shown to actually be super significant in actually improving your strength. It helps more so with like that feeling of pain in a set.
Yeah.
So
like decreasing RPE.
Yeah. So I think if you do something like increase your dopa by doing like an L-dopa cursor, or mucina, buprine, I think is what it's pronounced as. That's another
Okay.
L-dopa as well. Doing something along those lines, a nootropic-ish type thing is going to help give you more dopamine than the caffeine will. But
I'm gonna just start smoking cigarettes pre-workout now.
Good. That's how the Russians and the Jews.
That's the Russian. I remember the first time I ever went to the Arnold, there was a dude before deadlifts who's just hacking darts and drinking vodka.
Yeah,
and I'm like, this guy's onto something.
Right.
The only time I've ever used nicotine was when I was dieting really hard.
Because it helps suppress appetite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not promoting the use of nicotine. It is addictive, guys. So please do not do that unless you seek out medical supervision. We are not medical experts.
I am.
You are. You're somewhat of a psychologist. All right, Kevin, can you ask your question?
Yeah, so it was, you're probably gonna yell at me for this, but I know because some of your training is highlighted in red. But with time constraints, some days, as a powerlifter, does it benefit you to do your accessory work or as slow and controlled, or just kind of like plow through it, keep your heart rate up, and as far as like a cardio session?
So are you saying that your accessories are going to be more based on a time constraint, or are you saying that you just want to train to get your heart rate up more? Which one is it?
Well, like, yeah, kind of both. I mean, time constraint plus just push the tempo, get through the main movements, and then just, kind of like a super circuit.
So if it's a time constraint issue, then you want, what I would recommend is reducing total volume, so that way you're not constrained by time, so that you can get the most out of that session. If you ever go into a weight training session and you're like, I want to burn fat, I'm going to fucking smack you in the face, Kevin, because you don't want to go into a training session like, I'm going to burn as many calories as possible. I want to get a good workout. I want to be breathing heavy by the end of it. That's not the point, right? So if you are in a time constraint, just minimize the volume. You can superset things. They just have to be congruent with each other. You don't want to superset things that fatigue something else, right? Like, so imagine if you're doing a bench press workout and you're trying to do some back with it, right? And so you're thinking, okay, well, I'm pushing and I'm pulling, so that shouldn't have a negative effect on the other one, right? But if you think about it and you're doing a bench press and the way that acts on insertion and origin, and you're doing lat pull downs, the way that acts on insertion and origin, those lat pull downs can destabilize your bench press and create fatigue in your bench press with the stability, right, component of that. Because if your lats are tired, then they're not going to be able to stabilize your shoulder in the bench press. And then that can cause shoulder problems or pec problems. And that's why some people have pec tears in their bench press, because they're doing lat training with it, right? So you want to understand those mechanisms of action when it comes to the supersets. But as long as they're done appropriately and the exercises themselves aren't rushed, but the rest periods can be rushed, that's fine, right? But if you're trying to rush through the exercises and you're not executing them properly, then you're just wasting time. I would just tell you to skip what you're doing and not even worry about those accessories if you're just pushing through them.
It's more so the rest periods. Like, that's what I meant. So it's more so, I'm not just like flying through hammer curls and not even focusing on the muscle, but I just meant like pushing the tempo as far as rest periods.
Yeah, so if skill acquisition is not in high demand of an exercise, you can be in a little bit more of a fatigue state. But if it does require skill and focus, the more fatigued you are, the higher your risk of injury as well. So there's caveats to everything. But if it's strictly a time constraint thing, then I would minimize that session down, right? Because you don't need that much volume to push through it. But if it's a fat burning thing, then I'm just going to call you an idiot.
You said fat burner. You said fat burner.
you said burn some calories, man.
Oh, I didn't. Time constraint. You said burn calories.
This is
and you said you
recorded,
got
Kevin.
snack.
This is recorded. I will go back and listen to this.
All right, ladies.
What is
I
that
would-
supposed to mean? You only ladies can bicker?
No,
That's
I'm just calling
very
you two
sexist
ladies.
of you. That's very sexist of you. Men can bicker too.
Well, you're proving it.
Exactly.
I would tend to agree. I would want, like, if those are the two options, you're constrained by time. You never sacrifice quality, right? So the movement quality has to be maintained throughout. I typically do program my assistance work for my athletes in supersets because I do like using that as a means to keep them a little bit more, upbeat and get through them. I find if I don't track rest periods, or I don't superset, or I don't include some type of control within that part of the workout, get a lot of lazy lifters, right? They just kind of meander through the rest of their workout. The other thing too is that can be a great way to get some extra GPP work, right? If your heart rate's elevated for a significant amount of time, you're not sacrificing movement quality, of course, but that could have a great carryover into your recoverability, right? So using as many tools as you have at your disposal within the programming aspect to maximize recovery, to maximize output in the moment. As Tony mentioned, if you're going to superset, make sure they're congruent. So if you're doing pec training and back training at the same time, make sure that pec exercise is externally stabilized so there's less risk. And then you can go into training the lats as well together with them. So I would err on the side of reduce the volume as much as you have to maintain the quality of the session, and then move quickly through the exercises.
Yeah.
Justin?
Yeah, so I have a question there, Paul. When you're talking about introducing like GPP into our programming, like in the weight room, doing exercises like that, is that something you generally stick to doing like in the off season, or is that something you do like year round with clients?
Well, GPP would be anything except squatting, benching, and deadlifting, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yes. As far as the reducing rest periods go, I typically wouldn't do that in a meet prep, but the session efficiency within a meet prep is going to be much less towards assistance work and more so towards compound movements. It would be an issue. It would be an instance of, what are the time constraints of this lifter? Like, is there a certain amount of work that I want them to be able to get done, and I know they only have 2 hours or something like that? You also have to take into account like the personality of the lifter. So if you have someone who's like a very high strung, high anxiety person, asking them to like do a couple reps, take a rest, warm up, hit a top set, wait 3 minutes, go again, it's probably not going to be something that they enjoy very much or they are able to adhere to. And then, on the opposite end, if you have, a big lazy dude or girl, constraining them to rest periods will just get them through their workout, as opposed to just having them, like I said, meandering through. The benefits in terms of GPP, in terms of like that elevated heart rate, I think it's just secondary. I wouldn't like program with that intent, but it's just something you get out of it.
And I know you just asked Paul only, Justin, but is it okay if I chime in on my show?
No.
Oh, go ahead.
So if you're thinking about it in terms of like aerobic capacity to help improve recovery, is that kind of what you're thinking about in terms of keeping that in throughout the duration of a year-long training cycle?
Yeah, I mean, that was my initial thought was when Paul brought up GPP is
Yeah.
I didn't take into consideration that GPP is technically anything that's not squat, bench, or deadlift.
Well, yeah, Paul's an asshole, so he's going to take everything you say and tear it apart.
Of course.
I'm the nicer guy in the show, so I knew exactly what you were saying. And
yeah.
In terms of that, right? Like if you find value in aerobic work to improve recovery in the off season, then the same dynamics are going to lend itself true to the peak, right? So if you find that to be a valuable thing and your lifter is efficient at it, meaning that it doesn't require a lot of recovery, it doesn't accumulate a lot of fatigue. So modality is going to be really important. So something like a cycle ergometer is going to be a little bit better. And I would just have them do that year round, so they become very efficient at it. If you have someone who's new, I wouldn't start them aerobically conditioning them to build up recovery as they're going into a meet. But if it's something that they're already doing, I've seen guys like Carlos Reyes, he continues to keep his aerobic capacity up. He just minimizes the anaerobic work, and the recovery of that is going to be it's going to be beneficial. It's going to be more beneficial for that lifter. So they'll be able to maybe extend their peak a little bit longer. They can extend their taper a little bit. They don't have to have as much of a taper, right? They're able to train a little bit more often at a higher intensity. But if you find that work helps your lifter in a recovery domain, then I would keep that in, but I would just make sure it's specific to what they've always been doing, right? So if you're building up their aerobic capacity through supersets and minimal rest periods, you may be setting them up for failure if that's what you're going to continue to do into a peak. But if you're building up their aerobic capacity through a different modality that is not as demanding on recoverability, then that may put them in a better position. So it's ebbs and flows to it, but it can be beneficial continuing to do that into a peak. And I find that if you can keep someone's aerobic conditioning up while they're getting ready for a meet, it doesn't hinder their ability to perform at a high level. And it also allows them to get back into training a lot faster, right? Because I mean, how many times have we dealt with powerlifters who have lost their ability to create any type of fitness domains, right? At 8 weeks out, they're like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not even going to walk. I'm just going to roll everywhere. I'm going to have somebody carry me. I'm going to get in a wheelbarrow and they can just push me around, right? And you're like, okay. And then after the meet, they're like, oh man, the set of 6 destroyed my lungs. It's like, there's no way a set of 6 should destroy anybody's lungs. That should never happen, right? Do a set of 20, then you can talk to me. But so I think it'll allow them to transfer into their higher volume phase of training after a meet. It'll keep them healthier too, right? Especially if you're a PED lifter, right? Their health is so shitty to begin with. So why not keep that in is the way I look at it, right? But I would just start to I would start to think about maintenance of aerobic capacity and not building aerobic capacity as you start to transition into maybe 6 to 8 weeks out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. That's what I've done for myself as well. Like I like doing conditioning in the off season personally because I find it fun. But as I get into a peak, the modalities change. Between 2 to 4 weeks out, it's exclusively just walking, right? But there's something in there the whole time to be able to maintain my fitness level. And I noticed the last couple meets that I've done, like when I did end of 2019, then beginning of 2020, I was back in the gym the next week training. I didn't have to take much time off at all.
Yeah. And if you look at the concurrent training literature, right, it shows that you're able to improve strength and hypertrophy in higher intensity domains as long as they're short duration, like 6 to 8 weeks. And then after that, you start to build up too much fatigue. So there's a lot of programming considerations to think about, but it's definitely viable.
Agreed.
Any other questions? We have one more from the audience. So if you guys don't have one, we had cheat days on training days or rest days. So we live in a world now where the word cheat is frowned upon. Do you frown upon that as well, Paul? Or because now that you've seen your civil liberties get taken away in Canada, that you're not willing to take away words from human beings either?
That's a terrific parallel to draw. I think it depends who I'm talking to. For the most part, it really depends like who I'm speaking to. If I'm speaking to somebody with a history of eating disorders, I'm probably not going to use that terminology.
You probably wouldn't use that type of modality either, right?
No, I wouldn't either.
Exactly.
In general, the guideline for me would be if you are in a deficit, so the goal is fat loss, I would tend to ask you to plan these fun meals, we'll call them, post-workout. And if you're not going to track them, there'll be some type of controls in terms of mindful eating habits, prioritizing protein, things like that. If you are in a surplus and trying to gain weight, typically I will have the lifter do it on a rest day because their rest day macros are typically lower. And then their rest day macros are typically lower, so that'll get them their average calories for the week up higher. Very true, Blaine. There is more to Canada than Ontario. And you got, where are you at?
I'm in Saskatchewan, so I don't count for anything.
Yeah, you don't do anything. You guys literally have nothing. You have grass.
There's some rolly hills down in the bottom corner when you go, get into Alberta. That's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea of if you're in a calorie deficit and you're having a refeed type of day, there's so many caveats to that, right?
Yeah.
So say you're a physique competitor and you have a lag in body part, and every time you get as lean as possible, that's the thing that shrinks. It may be more advantageous to have your higher calorie refeed type day the day before you train that body part so that it's fueled properly, right? Because understanding that a higher calorie meal or a higher calorie day is not going to really affect that day's training session. That's usually going to be affected by the 24 hours before, not so much the day of. So you don't want to necessarily think in terms of that. Now, if you're someone who trains first thing in the morning, right, I would have them have their higher calorie day the day before, especially if it's a free meal, because what happens to a lot of people is if they get a free meal first thing in the morning, the rest of the day is shot, right? It happens a ton, regardless of who the person is, regardless of how mindful they are. You just want to avoid that as much as possible. Something else that I found for myself, and I was talking to Emma about this earlier, because I've built such lack of resiliency in my body when it comes to food that if I eat like off plan, I have full body cramps, I start sweating, and my heart rate jumps up like 20 beats per minute.
Oh my God. Okay. So last night I had a meal with my girlfriend and her family, and we had a really nice, it was like pork shoulder with apples, and then those like little mini potatoes baked. And I saved up 2 meals. Like I planned my macros to have like 2 meals worth of macros in that one meal. And then we had apple crumble. And I had like a small bowl of apple crumble with a little bit of ice cream. I was like, I'm so proud of myself for portion control. I sweat all night and my resting heart rate was 14 beats higher in the morning.
Yeah. So
all night. It was disgusting.
Right. So what I found was if you're going to have that meal and you have that negative effect, it can definitely carry over to the next day, right? Because anytime you interfere with your ability to fall asleep and have good quality sleep, the next day, ghrelin's going to be a lot higher, and that's going to be a lot harder for that person to stick to that plan that next day as well. So if you are going to introduce a free meal to that person, and they have that negative effect, doing that kind of mid-morning is going to be better. Sometimes too, to auto-regulate how much a person eats if they don't have a lot of willpower, is to let them have that meal as a pre-workout meal. Because if they eat like shit, that training session is not going to be fun either, right? So
I like that.
The psychology of the person is something that's the most important thing to think about when it comes to higher refeed days, free meals, anything like that. Right?
Agree.
Yeah. So
the other strategy I've used too is give it to them. Like if they're eating 5 meals a day, give them their free meal at meal 4. And so make the caveat that you have to get your 5th meal in for the day. So if they eat till they're too sick and they can't get that meal in, well, you didn't do what was required of you.
Yeah.
I have a question about free meals and cheat meals. If people struggle with them so much mentally, and the point is to give them a diet break to make it easier to stick to the diet, but they're struggling with them mentally, is there like another point to that? Like, why do you give them if they kind of just make everything worse?
Yeah, that's a great point. So if you're going to do like a free meal, it's only really from a psychological perspective that it has a benefit. There's no real physiological benefits to a free meal.
Right. So then you take it and like you can't stop eating, and then the next day it's harder to stick to your diet. So there's really not a benefit.
There's no benefit, but it's not something that I would work with that athlete with more so than just completely take it away from them. I would continue to leave that in there and continue to refine the process of mindful eating, habit building, and stuff like that. That way they don't feel like anytime they have a free meal, it's all or nothing mentality. So making sure that they continue to work on that and understanding that you're there to support them through that. But if it is something that's like physiological, they're very, very lean and they're dieting, it's maybe more advantageous to do higher calorie refeed days of just mostly higher carbohydrates, 1 to 2 days in a row. That can have some physiological benefits to it. But as far as like a free cheat meal, all out thing, that's just going to create an eating disorder if that person never had one. Because I remember the first time I worked with a bodybuilding coach and they were like, you get a cheat meal and you can eat between this window and this window as much as you can. And that was like a habit that I've always had to break, was like how, like every time I eat, it's like, well, he told me that you have to eat as much as you can and get like, and Mark Bell just posted something about this too, right? Mark Bell just posted something about if you want someone to stick to their diet, have them go a day and just eat whatever, as much as they want until they get so sick that they never want to eat that again. It's like, you just told, hundreds of thousands of people that follow you to create an eating disorder for themselves to get on a diet. So I think instead of avoiding it completely, even if that person does fall off the rails, is to continue to work on that psychological game with them and continue to try to refine those habits, because eventually that person needs to be able to live a normal life, understanding that they can go out to eat and not have to do that type of stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's about creating that healthy, as cliche as it is to say, that healthy relationship with food. So there's a few different ways that I've done it is, the goal is to give them a diet break. So maybe instead of giving them full free reign right off the bat, you still give them a macro content, but the macros are within a range. So instead of saying you have to eat X, it's just, you have to eat between this number and this number of carbohydrates, this number and this number of fats. So you kind of loosen the constraints or widen the range that they're supposed to be eating within. And that can kind of relieve some stress about it.
So like as a coach, the goal is always to get clients to be able to handle a cheat meal, or it just depends on the person?
So I would actually take away any emotional attachment to it, and it wouldn't let them see it as a reward. I wouldn't let them see it as anything other than just part of our plan. So there's no connotation around it. It just is something.
Seems very difficult to do.
It does. It is very difficult to do. So, that the education piece and the communication surrounding, okay, we're seeing, declines in XYZ metrics. A good way to accommodate for that is increasing your calories for 2 days. Here's how we're going to do it. These are the new constraints with which you're going to work through. This is what we can expect to happen. You can expect that you will gain a little bit of weight over the next couple of days. But once we return to our plan, it will come back down, and so on and so forth. So you kind of prepare them for what's going to happen ahead of time, and kind of just like, it's almost like telling them the end of the movie before they watch it, kind of thing. It takes away any type of anxiety about it. But it is a process, and the only way to get better at the process is to practice. So just like Tony said, you have to ingrain this like healthy relationship with what we're doing to be able to live life beyond the current state. If we get so fixated on these tight controls all the time, as soon as you loosen the reins, you're setting that person up for failure.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Kelly, you had a question?
Very dangerous.
You're muted.
Yeah, I just realized that. So, God, I hate the term cheat meals. I just hate it. So a few things cross my mind is I have a client who's totally derailed weight loss, and I'll speak with him this week. And my questions to him, there's going to be a bunch. There's going to be, okay, so what happened? I'm going to ask him why. And then biggest thing, I've been with him for over a year, and I'm going to be bringing back his goals to me from the beginning and point out, this is something that came to me when I worked for the weight loss company. It was like when people come into you and they bring up these bad habits, you remind them and say, well, how did that work out for you before? And you put it back in their face. Some people find that aggressive, but it's kind of a gut check, right? It's like, well, okay, you've done it before. What happened? And I'm going to try that with my client this week and sort of see what response I get from him. Like he got off his food logging, which he knows is huge, and he said he's going to get back on it. And yeah, I'm very big on why. I'm so big on why, because I want to hear the excuses. And it's not really meant to throw them back in their faces, but it kind of is, because I paraphrase back to them. And I'm like, well, why did you do that? And then it's like, and then I just repeat back what they say, and I let them digest what they said to me.
So what if he doesn't know why he did it?
Oh, I know he knows why.
I'm being serious.
I know. I get it. Well, it's just, so when I go into these questions, I say, you don't have to answer me right away. I want you to think on it a little, like what happened, why did it happen? And if they pause and say, if you don't get it, I understand you don't get it. I just want you to think about it for a bit, like what happened? Why did you go off the rails? I know with some people, it is the mindset of, oh, well, I screwed up my breakfast, the day is gone, or I screwed up this full day, so the week's gone. A lot of it is mindset. It's just a chance for them to think on it. Sometimes they know quickly, sometimes they don't. And I don't put the pressure on them to answer me. It's more of just a thinking point.
So the reason I asked that was I work with a number of clients right now. I don't know if it's time of year or whatever, but I work with a number of clients right now that have like a diagnosed binge eating disorder. They don't know why they binge eat. There's just some subconscious thing where they have a trigger, and they may not have identified that causes them to go on these overeating escapades. And it's not even like delicious food. It's literally just whatever's in their house.
Yeah.
So even just having them admit to me that they're doing that is a challenge. So the wording that we use and like the strategies that we use when we remove constraints is very important to make sure that we're not setting this person up for this like colossal failure, and that we're actually like teaching them tools along the way. So that's why I like still maintaining constraints, but loosening them, or giving them guidelines from which to pick from with their quote unquote free meal or fun meal. Just reminding them that, if they're going out to dinner with family, that the food is secondary to the social gathering, right? So just things like that. And then, asking them to like if things happen about, they're like, we're not therapists, right? So we have to know when to refer. If you're dealing with someone who you believe has an eating disorder, by all means, you need to refer out. Right? Like at the end of the day, like I joked about it. I'm not a medical professional, neither is Tony, neither are any of us. We can help guide people in the right direction, but there has to be a point in which we look at it and say, hey, I'm not equipped for this, and you need someone better.
Yeah, I agree. And I've done that with somebody already. I did that with someone back before Christmas, because her and I just weren't clicking. I'm like, you need to go talk to somebody else. Mm-hmm. Like there's something bigger going on here. No, this guy, one of his things is he's polite. And I mean that to a T. If he's at like a social setting, which is happening enough, even though Canada's in lockdown, he can't say no, and he knows it. Now, he also can't. He's got restrictions too. I mean, it's part of. I think part of it is pandemic related. I do, and yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Push out to somebody else. I totally agree. Yeah. And I might get to the point with him. I'll see what he's like this week, and I might defer him out if I can.
Yeah. Something to think about, right? Is like Paul said, reframing of things, reframing of the empathy of understanding what that person's going through, right? If that person is binge eating because they're overly polite, there could be some trauma to that, right? There could be some type of past trauma. Why are they so polite? Maybe they're polite because they're overweight and they think they have to be super nice to people, or else they're not going to be invited places. So they eat and then they can't stop eating, right? That's not an excuse, right? It's a psychological disorder. And understanding the idea that, if you look at the studies and you look at the research on food and on sugars, right? Like if there's rat research that shows that a rat was given sugar and a rat was given cocaine, the rat preferred the sugar over the cocaine every single time, right? Or the rat was given sugar when it pressed the button, and then every time it came back to press the button, it was continued to give sugar, and then they kept pressing the button, but no sugar was delivered. That rat would press that button until it died. It wouldn't stop, right? So understanding that if you're eating processed food, that's going to have a higher ability to overeat. If you look at the food science and look at all that stuff that goes into making food more palatable, you can help guide that person in their decision making, right? You can help, any place you go to eat, there's going to be choices that are healthier than others, right? So allowing that person to understand that they have the freedom to be polite and eat, but maybe these are going to be better choices that won't pull you down a path of being derailed, right? Understanding that, psychologically, there's a lot of trauma behind what that person's going through. It is a disorder. It's an eating disorder. Most disorders come from some type of traumatic experience and why they're having that. And it's their defense mechanism. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel happy. And they don't know how. It's like the continuous reward of, like, you seek out dopamine, you get dopamine, then there's this little bit of pain afterwards, and then you try to find more dopamine to fix that pain, right? And it's a negative resource that we have as in our biology of we're no longer nomads, so we don't really need that kind of dopamine and pain to keep us moving. So it's tough. It's something that you can give guidance to. It's never something that I would be super accusatory of, because then you're going to lose that client. So it's something that I would always refer out to if you never feel like you can fully allow that person to communicate with you. And even if you can, it's still something to refer out to. It's good to have someone in your network that deals with this stuff. Like, I have Amanda Rizzo, who works with 3DMJ, and she's a mental health consultant for them. And she works with a bunch of disordered athletes because 3DMJ is a bodybuilding company. And not to give a percent, but let's just say like 80 to 90% of these bodybuilders they have eating disorders because of their sport. And she works with them all the time. So that's my reference, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
I realize that you're having something go on that's out of your control. I sympathize with you. I understand what you're going through. I can't help you with this, but I know someone who can. And I think it'd be very valuable to stop paying me and start paying that person to help you with your help.
I did that as well. And I think that's a really good, another person is Crystal Miranda, who does the Healthy Mind movement on Instagram. She's fantastic and has helped me with a few clients who've dealt with these issues as well. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of remind young coaches that building out your network with professionals who are, that step above you, whether it's, PTs, chiros, physios, clinicians in that regard, but also if you're dealing with, the mental health of athletes, to have referrals on the other end as well. Build out your network and have some trustworthy people that you can provide service for your clients if you're not able to.
Perfect. I think that's a good way to end, unless somebody has follow-ups or questions. All right. Well, thank you guys for coming on the call. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the questions. Hopefully we can do this again. I think May 2nd, right, Paul?
May 2nd, we're actually going to be joined by Amanda and Crystal. So we're going to have a mental health roundtable for athletes. I'm really excited for that one. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, definitely. So if you guys want to jump in, that's going to be another free one where we're taking live audience to jump in as well. So if you guys are interested in that, feel free to sign up, get the link, and send in questions.